to the How We Do Digital Ministry podcast. I'm your host, Charlotte Elia. And on this podcast, we talk to leaders who are out in the world engaging folks through digital ministry. Today, I am delighted to have Ryan Dunn with me. Ryan is the Minister of Online Engagement with United Methodist Communications. Ryan, thank you so much for being here.
Charlotte, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. I thought we might get started with just help introduce yourself, give us an overview of your work, in particular with United Methodist Communications, please.
Yeah. Well, again, the title there is Minister of Online Engagement, but really what that comes down to is that I build digital content for connecting with what we call a seeker audience. So people who are curious about faith, but not necessarily dialed into the faith community. And in practice, what that looks like is I write for the website, I edit for the United Methodist Church website, again, all with an eye for that seeker audience. So I want to be kind of a point of invitation and information for people who are curious about what it means to be United Methodist. But with that, I also oversee some of the social media stuff. So we have this brand called Rethink Church, and all those social media platforms that Rethink Church is on, I oversee those accounts. And just recently, I've gotten into running the TikTok account for the United Methodist denomination, which has been an adventure and learning experience and a lot of fun.
How do you see? Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm like, I could keep going. I do a couple podcasts here and there. I do the Compass podcast. Again, that's for the seeker audience. But when COVID happened, we found that a lot of pastors and ministry leaders were looking for some advice and resourcing and connection in doing digital ministry. And so out of that need, we launched the Pastoring in the Digital Parish podcast. And that is geared really as a mirror of this podcast for a ministry leadership audience, those who are engaged in ministry in the digital realm and looking to connect there.
Awesome. What's exciting you at this moment as far as digital ministry goes?
I think the added viability that it's getting. When I started this job several years ago, people were wary of what it meant to be doing ministry in the digital realm. I think the perception was that I was just like this internet troll for Jesus, somebody who kind of surfed around trying to anticipate the questions that people asked and maybe fed them some content based on that. And it was then, it still is tough to track today, how much that actually translates to people dialing into a local congregation. But now I don't need to explain quite so much what it is that I do. People kind of get it. In fact, they get excited for it. There's an ongoing momentum in terms of the church occupying space in the digital realm. And that to me is incredibly exciting because, simply put, we're in a culture where that's where people are. And so as we talk about trying to bring the church into the world, to meet people and to build relationships, to me, it's very exciting to see the church at large grab onto the idea that, hey, we can start to build relationship in digital spaces.
Do you think there's anything unique or a way that you might describe something particular to a United Methodist approach to digital ministry as opposed to other mainline denominations?
As opposed to other mainline denominations, not so much. We may just talk about John Wesley a little bit more.
That seems pretty specific. And yeah, sure.
Yeah. And I think that's because as we talk about ministry in the digital space, especially speaking from the standpoint of mainline denominations, like really there's a counterbalance of voice that's happening. So much of the narrative and voice that gets general coverage is one that it doesn't necessarily reflect the values of the mainline Protestant church, which is very grace-centered, wants to have this voice of openness. And so really our presence really mirrors what a lot of other mainline Protestant denominations are trying to do as well, in terms of saying, like, hey, we want to be open for all people. We want to have an open table. We long to provide a place where you are accepted without sort of the connotations of saying, well, you need to ascribe to belief before you belong. Rather, I feel like a lot of the mainline denominations are supporting a narrative that says you belong, and therefore we believe that enables belief.
When you started this work with the denomination and really intersecting these conversations around digital ministry, was there something that surprised you? That challenged your expectations around it?
Yeah, I think whenever we start a new ministry, we certainly have high expectations of what it's going to look like. And this goes back into just some earlier times of digital marketing, when things were a little bit easier. Like it was the digital marketer's world back in, say, 2017, where, for example, the Rethink Church Facebook account, I could post anything and 30,000 people would see it. Those were crazy times, right?
Yeah.
Well, our social media platforms have gotten a little more adept to weeding out the voice of the marketer, so to speak, which, I know that we're representing churches, but very much so the online platforms like Facebook see that as a marketing presence. And they made a change, I think it was around 2018, 2019, where they really wanted to support conversation between people. And so the algorithm made their changes, and that's really what they look to support. And whereas once a post would get 30,000 views, now it might get 3,000 views and interactions. And so that was a big surprise, because it's like, what am I doing wrong here in this? We seem to be shrinking in platform. However, on the flip side of that, what we started to see was a rise in terms of engagement and ratio. So sure, 3,000 people were seeing our message, whereas before it was 30,000 people. But of those 3,000 people, significantly larger ratio of people were interacting with that content. So smaller audience, but a more dedicated audience, or a more receptive and interactive audience was going on. So for me, that was surprising. It was harrowing because all those questions that come with it, but a challenge in terms of then figuring out, well, okay, so what is it now that we have a tighter audience? How can we define them a little better? Get to know them a little bit more. It's really tough to know 30,000 people and to speak to that. And what I think that means for a lot of churches is that there's an invitation to really define what your niche is. Instead of just saying, well, we're gonna kind of broadcast out these general messages about the church, there's really an invitation to start to say, this specifically are what our values are. This is what we believe. These are the kinds of people who we are authentically are, and to introduce ourselves as that way, in terms of instead of just trying to be like all things for all people, delivering messages for all people, it just doesn't go anywhere. So I find that when we are drilling down into our audience and speaking to them and saying, hey, here's who we are and what's really important to us, that connects a lot more. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we're being exclusive in any way. We're still inviting people to participate, but we're doing so in an authentic kind of way, just to mention that, here's who we are. And I find that really helps in practice in terms of the local church, even more so than the denominational aspect.
From your unique perspective, are there any misconceptions around what you expect to happen around digital ministry versus what you think other church leaders might be expecting?
Yeah, I think the misperception is probably one that we're all kind of wary of, and that would be that we're just going to go back to how things were in 2019. That we are on this kind of slow rebound where people are going to come back and fill the pews as they once did and sit in our Wednesday night Bible studies as they once did. And that's a misconception, because I don't believe that's where our culture is headed at large. I think that we have moved into a digital first culture where people are looking to engage in digital ways, especially on a generational level, the younger generations. are going to look to engage digitally first. And so we need to continue to cultivate that digital presence in order to be with people, to meet people, to provide a front door or porch or whatever terms an entry point to the funnel of participation for people to grab onto and to see who we are and how they can participate in our communities.
Okay, well, speaking of which, tell me a little bit about your experience with TikTok.
Yeah. When I first got on, we had pitched this idea of having a denominational TikTok. And of course, the question was, what for? Who are we going to reach? And the answer to that was pretty simple. We're going to reach a population of people who we are not reaching in other platforms. So we can look at Facebook. It's kind of an older platform now. And we were kind of maxed out on our audience there. The number of people who are on TikTok and not on Facebook is pretty large. Mm-hmm. So there's a whole host of people who are engaging in TikTok that are not engaging in Facebook. And so this was just an opportunity for us to begin to build relationship and touch points with new people. Well, as part of that process of starting that, I interviewed a whole bunch of people about what they were doing in TikTok, and 99% of them said, when I first got on the platform, I had no idea what I was doing. So the invitation there was just to start throwing things out and see what sticks. And certainly we did that quite a bit at the beginning. In fact, we're still in the process of doing that because we're still trying to figure out what kind of content people are looking for the United Methodist Church to represent on a TikTok channel. And again, that goes back to that authentic thing. Nobody's jumping onto TikTok wondering what the United Methodist Church is going to post in response to the teenage dirtbag fad. That's just not a thing. But they are getting onto TikTok because they're curious about what the United Methodist Church stands for and what they might encounter when they're interacting with either United Methodists or participating in the ministry of the United Methodist Church. And part of that discovery was born out of a revelation that people are increasingly using TikTok as a search engine. Mm-hmm. So it has become, I don't know, Google definitely number one. YouTube, surprisingly, I think is the number two search engine, and TikTok is on there. And so when we grabbed on the idea of, well, how can we maximize our potential in terms of using TikTok in answer to people's search queries, then the TikTok content started seeing a lot more interaction. So we find that it's really useful just to answer questions that people might have about the United Methodist Church. Hey, what do you believe about Jesus? How do United Methodists read the Bible? That's actually our most watched TikTok video. What do we believe about baptism? These are the kinds of questions that are engaging the most interaction for us these days.
The United Methodist Church is going through it.
Right? Yeah. Right? That's a kind way of putting it. Thank you, Charlotte.
Well, I also didn't want to get into quite all of it, but okay. So, it seems like also a unique opportunity to make sure your message is out there, congregational messaging is out there to, mm-hmm. I guess, differentiate between some of these other groups that are popping out. Or I don't know, what do you see in this moment for the denomination as far as digital communications and ministry?
Yeah, it's I think right now what we're feeling called to do is just to lean into being more of who we are, mm-hmm. so to speak. Yeah. And to speak aspirationally about what the church could be, while we still authentically recognize that there is some dissension within our denomination. We're going through this period of it's not a split, but there are congregations who are leaving. And we're in a period of discernment about what the future is going to lead us into. We can't be in denial of that. It's not like we just want to throw out a message saying hey, come join us. It's a happy family. And then you find all this dysfunction within there. But I think it's important to note, and might even be a point of invitation to some people, that we are having conversations around these issues. And just as we can kind of mirror this with our American experience, just as there's some point of difference in that, and yet we're still American together. There's some point of difference in terms of what it means to be United Methodist as well, for better or for worse. And we are in a process of growing. So we use the term big tent a lot in terms of big tent theology. There's this wide spans and varying degrees. Degrees isn't the right word. There are varying points of view in terms of theology, and that can be a bit of a strength, because we know that we certainly have a lot to learn from each other. That's also a challenge, especially when you have the point of view of, well, I need to speak for the United Methodist Church. Well,
right.
At some points it's like, hey, I can offer up what I believe is a United Methodist, but my sister on the East Coast or in the Southeast, she may have a different point of view on this particular issue. And that's okay. I hope that there's actually some point of invitation and a feeling of connectedness, and saying, like, we don't all need to ascribe to the same belief in order to be a part of this large body of Christ's movement in the world.
Do you think it's possible to have those kind of difficult conversations in the digital space and have them well?
Yes, I do think it is. It is a challenge because, certainly there are people who are just going to take their one shot and leave the conversation. But I do see people engaging in it rather well. And when they do, I think it's because they enter into it with a sense of humility, and with an eye for offering grace. Like my personal guideline for engaging in conflicting kind of internet conversations is to really question, well, is this an opportunity for me to offer grace? And if not, then it's not something that I need to pursue, especially as I'm overseeing comments on the United Methodist Church account or on one of the Rethink Church accounts. Somebody trolls in and, offers their very strongly worded counterpoint that puts somebody else down. Well, is that a conversation? Is this an argument that is going to end up with me being able to offer grace, or is this an argument that I'm shooting into just because what that person said upset me? Well, right. if I can't make a beeline towards grace, then it's not a conversation that I really need to be pursuing. And so for those who are entering into those open-ended questions and discussions online, I think where they are seeing success is in saying, I'm here offering a point of view that I understand that not everybody is going to agree with. There's the humility, right? Here's where I'm coming from, and I'm okay with you expressing where you are coming from. And there's the invitation to grace.
I think that's a wonderful framework. Yeah. Where would you at this moment urge congregational leaders to invest their time and energy as far as digital ministry? I mean, like particular realms or ideas or questions that they really need to address, maybe.
Yeah, well, I think first is to grab onto the idea of having some kind of presence online. And I mostly defer to people to say, like, just go where your people are. So if you're an older congregation where your people are on Facebook, lean into Facebook. That's totally fine. We're not all called to be on TikTok. That's a good thing. We're not all called to be on Instagram. That's okay as well. Just lean into where your people are. But then to recognize that since we are moving into this digital first culture, we need to understand that there are going to be some people whose primary engagement with us is going to be through that digital realm. That might be on Facebook. So they're with us on Facebook all the time. They're only going to join our worship services on Facebook. Maybe they'll come in person at Christmas time, but their other 90% of involvement is going to be through Facebook. They might only join a Bible study through Zoom. They're going to do this digitally first. Well, the invitation then becomes to consider, how do we put that person in the front row of our experience? So instead of just thinking, well, how do we offer them a place in the room and kind of let them fishbowl from the back? How do we put that digital participant in the front row of a participatory experience? And that can just look like, hey, maybe it means that we're careful about where we place our cameras during our live streamed worship service. We're intentional about addressing the person who's participating in our worship service from home. Or within a Bible study, it means, well, first of all, that we offer a digital entry point for participation, but also then that we're mindful that people are going to be participating in a discussion in that virtual way. Say it's on Zoom. And so we need somebody who's going to address those Zoom people, but also to make sure that they have a voice within the room. So whether that means that it's somebody who's reading off their chat comments, or that they're actually, we have the technology in place where we can hear their voices and we can see their faces. That's highly important. So just to kind of entertain those questions around, what does it look like to make our digital participant a full participant in these, in the normal activities of what we do as church?
Excellent. And you have an opportunity to practice some of these things, right? Tell me about your work on the congregational level.
Yeah, I work with Glencliff United Methodist Church. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and they are actually a tiny congregation here in Nashville, Tennessee. We are what is called a mission congregation. And what that kind of means is that we don't support ourselves. We're actually supported by other area congregations who have said, we see viability in having a presence in this particular area, and we want to support this congregation in action. So we have a very small staff, only one full-time employee, and I'm there as a volunteer. And so that is a tremendous learning experience for me, because I realized that a majority of our churches are coming to digital ministry from a place of limited resources. And, I'm experiencing that quite well at Glencliff UMC, that whatever budget we're investing into our digital ministry is all made up. It didn't exist before. It was not planned for at the beginning. And since we don't even have a full control over our budget, we have to be very careful about how we spend money and appropriate funds towards doing that kind of thing. So I found that there are a lot of ways to engage in digital ministry for free. For example, you can use old cell phones as cameras for your live stream experiences. So I've been able to take my son's old cell phone, which was still in pretty good working condition, just with the cracked screen, and I can prop that up as a second camera for our live stream worship experience. And I did that because all we were able to offer before was this kind of large room view of our worship experience. And as we think about putting that digital participant in the front row, this was very much like, here's the back of the room, here's the fishbowl look. Sometimes we're going to talk to the camera, but now we can actually kind of cut between one point of view and another, and put that person into a more immersed experience where they have the opportunity to kind of proverbially turn their head to view different things within the worship service, right? So finding a way to kind of repurpose old technology like that works extremely well. And technology is advancing so much, especially in terms of offering ways to live stream, that it's becoming more and more accessible with a minimal amount of research. So, I've been able to, quite a bit of it leans on some of the other areas that I've been able to pull technology from. So at home, I have this little podcast mixer. Well, I've been able to take that to church and transform our kind of analog signal into something that I can run into the computer, and then we can have a little bit more of a amplified sound moving into our live stream instead of just a single microphone within the room.
Right. Well, it's not smaller, mid-sized churches. It's not just budget issues with digital ministry, right? It's resources of time
Yes.
for your staff and volunteers too. So I'm wondering how, you're in the middle of these digital ministry conversations. You have this wide, expansive knowledge of, all the tools available, all the cool things that all these people are doing. What's the decision process around, okay, which one of these are going to serve this congregational ministry? Where are we going to put our energy? How does that decision process work for you?
For us, it's really a, I don't know, I guess the easier answer is, it's what I want to put out there.
Okay.
But I do that because we are so small, it's not like I'm working with a staff of social media managers, right? We have a social media manager. I am that social media manager, and that, kind of comes down to my discretion, because that's where my passions lie. Mm-hmm. And so maybe that is one point, is, certainly lean into the passions of the people in your congregation. And this is the kind of thing that I want to do. And so I'm feeling super empowered by being able to employ that for the congregation, and then having the I guess the leeway to use my own discretion in terms of what we post. But for us, we line everything up in terms of how do we speak to the voice of Glencliff United Methodist Church. And we found that the more specific we get in terms of speaking to who we are, the better response we get. Mm-hmm. So instead of trying to figure out, like, how do we throw out a social media post, say an Instagram message that we think is going to get, well, for us, it would be great if it got 100 views, hundreds of views, right?
Sure.
Instead, we think, well, how do we communicate authentically who we are, and then move forward with that kind of messaging. So, and that is our foremost invitation, or our foremost thought. We want to communicate who we are, even above and beyond getting people to participate. We think that when we communicate who we are, first and foremost, as a justice-seeking, all-loving congregation, these are the kinds of messages that we default to. We think that we'll be reaching more people when we do that, instead of just kind of broadly broadcasting invitations to come and participate in the things that we're doing, if that makes sense. So for us, it looks like, hey, we're going to offer a sermon quote from Sunday that talks about justice seeking. And then we're going to offer up some pictures of one of our pastors who's out in the field, feeding people, or out in the field meeting with some of the unhoused folks in our community. Before we say, like, hey, we also have a Thursday afternoon gathering that we'd love for you to be a part of. And so there's even an awareness there of, like, we want to provide people with information far more than we want to make an ask or request of people. I mean, it's a really big thing to come and ask somebody to be a part of our Sunday morning worship service, or to be a part of our Thursday afternoon gathering. So let's make sure that they know who we are authentically, before they feel like, oh, now I'm being asked to do something with these people.
Oh, you don't immediately ask them to join the choir?
Yes. No, not until they show up at least once.
Yeah. Through the audition process.
Right, yes.
No, I think that's such an essential reminder. These tools are there for us to tell our story and the story, this gospel story. And it's got to be more than the back of the bulletin, right?
Yeah.
We are almost out of time, Ryan. So
no way. Okay.
I wanted to ask you if you would cast a little vision for us. What do you think, or what do you hope the church looks like in 5 to 10 years?
Wow. I think the future of the church is, I'm going to use that word niche again. The future of the church is niched. And that doesn't mean that all of our congregations are going to be like very focused on one segment of the population. But I think ministry as a whole is going to be niche, that we're leaning more to a time where the way that we make meaning and create meaning for ourselves is very individualized. So, I may be a United Methodist, but I also draw on practices from, meditative practices from a Buddhist tradition. And I love the prayers of the early church that comes out of the Roman Catholic tradition. And all of these are ways that I kind of create my own spiritual meaning. And with that in mind, we're going to have to acknowledge, and we are acknowledging, just because the culture is taking us in that direction, that people have a very interest-based way of creating meaning now. So they're able to go out, search for themselves based on their own interests. And so we're going to start in ministry to lean into those interests a little bit. So we're going to find more ministries popping up for people who are just solely based in like a Christian perspective on meditation, for example, or prayers that happen at noontime, people who want to pray the hours through the day. Some of the most successful ministries that I see right now that are making waves in the digital world are for, as they put it, these ministries put it, are for nerds, geeks, and gamers,
right.
For people who are engaging in, they call it nerd culture. That's their word, not mine. I don't want to label anybody, but we're all a nerd in some kind of way, aren't we? So I think it's okay. But for people who are engaged heavily in that kind of nerd space online, whether they're watching people game on Twitch or participating in say Marvel sections on Reddit or something like that, that there are niches for ministry within that. How do we drop into those spaces and engage with people in a grace-centered, gospel-centered, Jesus-centered, how do we bring Jesus into that room kind of deal? That's happening more and more. And this is where we're starting to see some new ministries begin to see quite a bit of growth.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. I love it when these things are useful and hopeful. So I appreciate that. Ryan, where do you want to be found online?
Can I just everywhere? Probably the best way to drill into some of the things that I'm doing through digital ministry is I have a personal website, digitalministrynotes.com, where you can kind of keep up with some of the things there.
Okay. Great.
But hey, I'll just plug it out there. Follow the United
Please.
Methodist Church on TikTok. We could use it.
All right, awesome. Yeah, everybody go see what that looks like.
Yeah.
And that's really cool. Thank you. Thank you for talking with us today. And thank you, everybody who is listening. And until next time, peace and blessings to you all.